We've seen one senseless killing after another, one tragedy after another. A couple days ago, of course, you held a press conference. I think a young 15-year-old boy was shot, and you were like, "How long? Give me some help here." Let's talk about the challenges of. I know you're only 100 days in, but what are some of the biggest obstacles right now to making the city safer, making the subway safe again? What are some of your biggest challenges?
Well, the young man was 12 and sitting in the living room with the family. I wish we could have had the entire city and country hear their mother talk about the loss of her son, and I've heard it far too often. And let's be clear, these problems are decades in the making. I say over and over again, using the analogy, there are many rivers that are feeding the sea of violence in our city and in our country. And we have to dam each river. And we're doing our job in the New York City Police Department. We took over 1,000 guns off the street this year, almost 10 a day. You see what's happening in Chicago. Last year they took over 12,000 guns off the street. So it's a combination of intervention and prevention that I talk about all the time. We're doing our jobs on the ground. Our officers, my anti-gun unit, made over 130-something arrests. And the real troubling part, many of them are repeat offenders. And so we're going to continue to do our job, but we need help. We need help from Washington, D.C. We need help from Albany, and we need help to make sure that we get the support to help these officers who are on the ground.
I just wanted to ask Mr. Mayor, one of the interesting and tragic things that's happening in the country right now is you see crime is up across the country, not just in New York, where there's been so much discussion of the bail law. And so we really actually as a country don't even fully understand the causes of crime, which is why when you say there are many rivers that feed it, that's exactly right. I know you've talked about summer jobs programs, but beyond that, really, what does your administration plan to do about the other potential causes of disruption that are feeding this violence, which clearly has coincided with the pandemic more than any one law or a policy change?
No, so true. And we have witnessed before the increase in crime across the country, and the solution started in New York. We started the process of turning around the lack of safety nationally, and we're going to do it again. But you're right. Number one, when we put in place our dyslexia screening, it's unbelievable that 30% of inmates in our country are dyslexic. We have one high school on Staten Island to deal with dyslexia. We want to make sure we have it across the borough. Learning disabilities. 48% of the prisoners at Rikers Island have a learning disability. 80% don't have a high school diploma. Education is one of the feeders. We fail. 65% of black and brown children never reach proficiency in the city. So when you start correlating with the failing policies in the city, it feeds these crimes. And then the pandemic, the mental health issue after the pandemic is so real. I mean, when you have someone put human waste in someone's face, attack someone with a hammer, you're seeing the outcome of the failure of how we treated people during the pandemic, and we're seeing the results of that. But I'm not stating that because we're not getting the help in Albany, or if we don't get help in Albany or Washington, that we don't have the obligation, responsibility to make our city safe. And Myra, it's more than the bail law. People use just the bail law. It's not. It's earned income tax credits. I need victory there. I need to make sure that mothers can have child care so they can return to work to get our economy back up and operating. So it's more than just one part of my blueprint to end gun violence. It's a holistic approach so we can get it right.
You mentioned, Mr. Mayor, again, the frustration of police officers with the bail law that was put in place in 2019, which waived cash bail for some nonviolent offenses. It looks like in the new state budget there are going to be some changes to that law. What would those mean practically? Would that be helpful to your officers? Would it be helpful to you? Yeah,
and you're right, and it's about rebuilding the trust. We sent a mixed message to police officers while they were doing their job. After making arrests, we were unwilling to prosecute cases. We had a bottleneck court system where too many dangerous people were not having their day in court. So what we must look at the various areas of these laws. Number one, we can't continue to encourage adults giving juvenile guns. That's what we're doing right now. There's a climate on the street that carrying a gun is no longer an illegal act, and we have to stop that. We need to look at the discovery process. I'm hoping that they examine the discovery process, something that many people don't know, but it's a major impact for district attorneys to produce the evidence and turn it over in a timely manner. We have to look at repeated offenders. There's only a small number of people who are driving crime in our city and in the country. They're repeated offenders, and if we don't zero in on them, you're going to constantly see this problem of...
So you support a change to the bail law to keep that kind of person off the street?
Yes, I believe that we should have a dangerousness standard in the bail law, but we need to also look at those other areas that were clearly laid out.
So, Rev, there's obviously a balance, whether you're talking about the plain clothes unit, whether you're talking about the bail law. The mayor is trying to go further than some city council people would like him to go. How is that balance working? You've always talked about the balance between being aggressive when you're talking about making New York City streets safe, but at the same time, obviously pushing reform with police officers, with the force, and being concerned about also social issues.
You know, he addressed that yesterday at National Action Network, because many of us agree that we cannot go back to what we faced under the era of stop and frisk and broken windows, and as I stated, a broken trust. But I think that the difference here is that this mayor has been a policeman and a victim of police brutality. So he understands both. He was brutalized as a youngster, as a black coming up in New York, and he was a policeman and was shunned by some elements in our community for being a policeman until he proved himself that I'm going to be a different kind of cop and fight for that. I think the thing that I most resent is it's almost like we accept that blacks and browns are synonymous with criminals, and that we don't oppose crime. It's how we do it and how we reimagine it, and I think that that's the needle that he's going to have to thread, and I think he cannot do it without people on both sides. The mayor and I talk, and I say, well, I got questions. He said, let's meet. I said, some of the civil liberties and civil rights, let's meet. He says, you know me, 35 years I've been on this side, but some things we have to do. And I will never forget, 3 weeks after I did the eulogy for George Floyd, a police brutality victim, I came back to Brooklyn, and he was more president than running for mayor, and preached the funeral of a 1-year-old kid killed with gang fire. So how do I mourn one and act like the other one should not be dealt with? And I think, is that not the dilemma that you're dealing with?
Right, and you know, what you hear often people say, we can't go back to the heavy-handed policing. But we also can't go back to 2,000 homicides a year.
Correct.
98,000 robberies and 98,000 felonious assaults. So it is comfortable in some circles to say we can't go back to heavy-handed policing, but they never finish the sentence. I'm not going to see the city go back to seeing mothers mourn 12-year-old babies. I'm not going to go to a city where we're going to have over-aggressive, heavy-handed policing, but we're going to make sure that crime is not a norm. And it has become a norm because of generational, just really betrayals in our city, and we're going to tackle that.
I mean, I have to just say that I've covered 3 mayors, and so when I hear you talk about accountability, both to keep crime down, but also to hold accountable the police department, it's encouraging. But what I am personally hoping to see from you is the reforms you plan to put in place within the police department to do that, and the kind of transformational change that you've talked about, because you will one day no longer be mayor. And this police department, as you know, needs enormous changes in leadership.
You know, just remaining biblical, I'm not the choir, I wrote the song. I agree with you. You know, the problems, I know the problems in the police department, they're systemic, they're real, but I also know that there are men and women who wear that uniform and they put themselves in harm's way every day. And when I send them out there to do a job, I'm not going to leave them out there, and I'm going to lead them from the front. We need to weed out the bad acting police officers, but we also need to uplift those officers that go beyond the call of duty.
Right.
It is a difficult challenge to run in a building that someone is discharged discharging a gun.
Right.
That's a frightening thing. Look at Officer Mora and Rivera. These were two young officers. They were heroes. They are not coming home. And a mother doesn't mourn differently if they lose a child, or dad doesn't mourn differently, they lose a child because of a gangbanger or just a violent police officer. We need to stop the violence of innocent people.
So let's continue this discussion, and Maura, jump in as well, if you will, because we obviously have two issues here. We have rising crime. We have police officers who, since 2020, have said, not only in New York, but across the country, politicians don't have our back. We're not going to go in. We're not going to be as aggressive. We're not going to go in to certain areas if we're going to go in and maybe, act in a chaotic situation and end up in jail. And then on the other side of it, Maura talking about the police reform. So how do you implement the dramatic reforms that Maura's talking about, and at the same time, and I can't say this enough because I keep hearing this from cops everywhere, at the same time, the cops know you've got their back.
Yeah.
Good cops know you got their back, that when they put their kids to sleep at 8, kiss them on the foreheads, say goodnight to their husband or wife, and they go out into the streets and may not come back the next morning, that they know they can do their job and you have their back if something goes wrong, as long as they play by the rules.
Well said. You know what? The first way to do that is you hire a mayor that needed people to have their backs.
Check. Okay, we do that.
Because they wore that uniform. Second, you hire a mayor that spent his entire law enforcement career fighting for the reforms. The reforms people are talking about right now, they're my reforms. These are the reforms that I introduced. And so what I'm saying to people, you trusted me then to deal with the reforms in law enforcement and safety. I need you to trust me now. Let's work together and make this a safe city.
And Maura, hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.